The moment Catherine Williams saw the necklace, everything around her seemed to freeze. One moment, she was savoring the aroma of her wine, and the next, she was motionless, eyes locked on the pendant hanging just below her son's new girlfriend's collarbone. A silver charm shaped like a delicate crescent moon, engraved with a single initial, M. Jason Williams smiled proudly beside her, eager to introduce the woman he had brought home. "Mom, Dad, this is Maya." Maya offered a gentle smile, her voice calm, but filled with an undertone of tension. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Williams." Catherine didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixated on the necklace, the room seeming to grow colder around her. James Williams, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat. "So, how did you two meet?" "At the community center. Maya helps teach coding to kids. It's where I volunteer." "Impressive," James muttered, forcing a smile. Catherine blinked slowly, setting her glass down untouched. "Excuse me," she said, her voice suddenly distant. "I'll be right back."
Catherine walked out of the room, her footsteps stiff and deliberate. Her hand reached for her necklace, tucked carefully beneath her blouse. A cold wave of dread washed over her as she tried to steady herself. Something was terribly wrong. The image of Jader's necklace, the delicate crescent moon etched with the single letter S, haunted her every thought. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen it before. When she reached the master suite, she quickly shut the door behind her, locked it, and hurried to her antique jewelry box. Her hands trembled as she opened it, fingers brushing over the velvet-lined compartments. Nestled among the pearls and diamonds, she found it. Her own gold crescent moon necklace, the same symbol, the same letter, S. Her heart raced, memories flooding her, memories she had buried long ago. She hadn't seen that necklace in nearly 2 decades. Back in the dining room, the tension in the air was palpable, but Chase was oblivious. He was beaming proudly, eagerly talking about his new girlfriend. "She's amazing, Mom. Jader's been volunteering at the community center, teaching coding to kids. She's applying to Stanford, too," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Robert Williams, seated at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow and nodded. "Impressive," he murmured, offering a small smile. Jader, still sitting quietly across from them, glanced down at her plate, her fingers tracing the edge of the glass in front of her. "That's wonderful," Robert continued, his eyes shifting to Jader's necklace once again. "That's a beautiful necklace. Is it a family heirloom?" Jader looked up, her smile softening as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "No," she said quietly. "I don't know where it came from. I grew up in foster care. This necklace was the only thing I had when I was found." The room went still. Chase's enthusiasm faltered, and Robert exchanged a quick look with the empty doorway where Catherine had just disappeared. Jader, unaware of the ripple of discomfort she had caused, was still staring at the gold charm, oblivious to the past she had just opened up. Upstairs, Catherine stood in front of the bathroom sink, cold water rushing over her wrists as she tried to collect herself. Her breath was uneven, her mind spinning. She hadn't thought about that night in so long. The rain, the screaming, the night that had changed everything. She had made a decision then, one she swore she would never speak of again. And now, this girl, in her home, wearing the same necklace, The weight of it all crashed down on her, and she gripped the counter, trying to steady herself. Downstairs, Chase, completely unaware, kept the conversation going, filling the silence left by his mother's absence. Oh, and Maya's really into robotics, too. She built his robot for one of her projects. It's incredible, he continued, his voice filled with pride. Jader, trying to ease the tension, laughed softly. I had this one coding student who accidentally triggered the robot to spin in circles. We couldn't stop it. We had to shut the whole system down. Her grin was genuine, but the nervousness was evident in her eyes. Robert chuckled lightly, but his mind was elsewhere. That necklace. He had seen it before, long ago. The memories came rushing back, memories he had fought to forget. A hospital room, a blood-soaked blanket, and a baby wrapped tightly in that very same crescent moon necklace. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Catherine returned, her expression calm, her demeanor cold as porcelain. She took her seat at the table with a tight smile. "Sorry, I just needed to check something," Catherine said, her voice carefully neutral. Chase looked at her, concern evident in his eyes. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Of course," she said quickly, then turned her attention to Jader. Her voice was suddenly sharp. "Have you ever tried to trace your birth parents?" Jader's face faltered. She hesitated, her eyes lowering as she recalled the painful memories. "I used to," she whispered, "but I stopped when someone warned me to let it go." There was a silence in the room that felt suffocating. Chase leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Someone warned you?" Jader nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, about 3 years ago. I filed for non-identifying records, and the next week I got a typed note in the mail. No return address, just one sentence." "What did it say?" asked Robert, his voice soft yet urgent. Jader looked between them, her gaze flickering nervously. It said, "Stop digging. Some graves are sealed for a reason." Catherine's knuckles turned white around her wine glass, her heart racing. "And you just stopped?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Just like that?" Jader shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I was 15. It scared me. I thought maybe my birth parents were dangerous or powerful, so I let it go. I told myself the past didn't matter." Chase reached across the table, taking Jader's hand in his. "It matters," he said, gently. Robert cleared his throat, his voice low. "You said the necklace came with you when you were a baby. Do you still have any of the paperwork from the system?" Jader blinked, surprised by the question. "Only a copy. Why?" Robert's eyes darted to Catherine before quickly looking back at Jader. "Would you be willing to let us see it?" Before Jader could respond, Catherine's voice cut through the air, almost a command. "I want to see it. Tonight." An hour later, Chase parked the car outside Jader's apartment, the contrast between their worlds more stark than ever. From penthouse ceilings and sparkling views to creaky floorboards at a cramped living space, the differences couldn't have been more evident. Catherine and Robert had insisted on coming, though neither of them spoke much on the drive over. Catherine said she needed clarity. Robert didn't speak at all. When they arrived, Jader apologized for the mess, though her apartment was spotless. Neatly stacked books, a small potted plant on the windowsill, and an old laptop charging on a makeshift desk were the only personal touches in the otherwise minimalist space. Jader retrieved a slim manila folder from a fireproof box under her bed. "It's not much," she said, handing it to Catherine. "Just intake notes and a faded medical report." Catherine opened the folder with trembling fingers. The first page was a hospital report. Female, infant, African American, approximately 5 days old, found abandoned near the Lincoln Park shelter, wearing crescent moon necklace. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Beneath it was a social worker's note dated 2007. It described the infant's appearance as healthy, with no injuries or witnesses. An anonymous caller had reported the location, a female voice, mid-30s, possibly educated, but had refused to give a name. "She's safer without me," the note read. Robert stepped back, his face pale. Catherine sat down slowly on the edge of Jader's couch, her eyes glued to the papers in her lap. She whispered, "Oh my God, it was you." Chase looked between them, confusion spreading across his face. "Wait, what do you mean, Mom? What's going on?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the report, as if it held the key to a long-buried secret. Jader stood frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the desk, her face a mixture of confusion and shock. "You recognize this, don't you?" Robert asked, his voice almost a whisper. His gaze wasn't on Jader, it was on Catherine, who still hadn't moved. Finally, Catherine spoke. Her voice was low, trembling. "That necklace, it's not just similar, it's the same. I had one made years ago. Before—" She hesitated, unable to continue. "Before what?" Chase asked, his panic rising. Robert's voice was barely audible. "Before the baby." Jader stepped back, her face paling. "What baby?" she whispered. Catherine stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. "This isn't the time. This isn't the place." Jader's voice wavered. "I think I have the right to know." Catherine turned to her son. "Chase, she may be your sister." The room went silent, the weight of the words sinking in. No one spoke. Jader's breath caught in her throat as she stared at Catherine, disbelief written on her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. Catherine's eyes were filled with tears, but she said nothing. Chase stood there, his entire world tilting on its axis. "No, that can't be right," he said, his voice cracking. "That's insane." Jader stood frozen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Catherine stood silent, the weight of the years bearing down on her. Jader sat on her bed, her legs pulled tightly to her chest. The necklace she had once considered just a keepsake clutched in her hand. The weight of everything that had unfolded in the last few hours pressed on her like 1,000 pounds. Her world, once clear and simple, had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She didn't know who she could trust anymore, herself included. The uncertainty gnawed at her. A soft knock on her door broke her reverie. It was Chase, standing in the doorway, his eyes hollow and dark. He hadn't slept either. In his hand, he held a small, plain envelope. "It's from a private DNA lab," he said, his voice low. "They'll come to you. No records, no drama, no publicity." Jader looked at the envelope, unsure. She didn't take it immediately. "You still think I might be your sister?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to think," Chase admitted, his voice cracking. "But I know I want the truth." Jader stared at the envelope for a long time, the weight of the decision settling in. Finally, she took it from his hand. Back at the Waverly penthouse, Catherine sat at the dining table, her eyes distant and vacant. Robert paced restlessly beside her, phone in hand. "She hates me," Catherine whispered, barely audible. "I saw it in her eyes." "She's allowed to," Robert replied quietly. "But that doesn't mean this ends in hate." A few hours later, the DNA technician arrived and left without a word. 3 days passed in silence until an email arrived in Jader's inbox. Her heart hammered in her chest as she opened it slowly. The words seemed to blur before her eyes. 99.9% probability of a direct maternal relationship to Catherine Waverly. And beneath that, no paternal match to Robert Waverly. Catherine stood alone on the rooftop garden of Waverly Tower, clutching the original necklace she had kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. The DNA results had confirmed what she had always known deep down, but the lack of Robert's paternity changed everything. She whispered softly, "I failed her twice. Once when I gave her away, and again when I met her and saw nothing but shame." Behind her, Jader appeared quietly. "You wanted to meet?" Jader asked gently. "So I came." Catherine turned slowly, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Thank you." They sat on a bench beneath the glass awning, the hum of the city below them. "I wasn't going to come," Jader admitted, "but I remembered what you asked me the first night, about the necklace." She paused. "You asked me if I'd ever looked for my parents. I used to want answers. Now I think I just want peace." Catherine reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She handed it to Jada. "I had 2 made, one for me and one for the baby I thought I'd never see again." Jader opened the box slowly, her eyes focused on the necklace inside. She looked at Catherine, her gaze soft but unwavering. "I don't need it to know who I am," Jader whispered, "but I'll wear it to remember who you chose to become." 3 months later, the Waverly Foundation quietly announced a new scholarship initiative for young women in foster care pursuing education in technology. It was named after no family member, but rather the Jader Lane Initiative. At the official press launch, Catherine stood beside Jader, not as a benefactor, but as a mother trying to show up the way she never had before. Chase stood at the podium and spoke, his voice filled with pride. "She's not my sister by blood, but I'd be proud if she was." The room fell silent before erupting into applause. Later that day, in a quiet corner of the Foundation's new mentorship wing, Jader worked with a shy 12-year-old girl, helping her troubleshoot a broken circuit. Catherine watched from the hallway, her eyes brimming with emotion, yet steady. Robert stood beside her. "She's not your mistake. She's your miracle." Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jader wore both necklaces now, hers and the one Catherine had saved, not as symbols of pain, but as a fusion of past and future.
Jader hadn't just found her place. She had rebuilt it. Sometimes the deepest connections aren't the ones we're born with, but the ones we choose to nurture. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes redemption is possible. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that love is about choice, not blood.